So welcome back to the tool shed. In this tool, Get a Rope, I want to share with you a profound tool that I use when I'm going through hell, that I use when I'm feeling lost, confused. So it's not something I use on a daily basis, but when you're in it, you know you're in it and you need it. It actually comes from, as I'm saying it, I'm realizing wasn't there a salsa commercial or some type of commercial back in the day, like in the 80s? Get a Rope, right? About those cowboys. I think it was like a salsa, like a city slicker was eating crappy salsa. I don't know. Whatever. They were talking about hanging a guy. But the bottom line is we're not talking about hanging a guy. We're talking about saving a guy, saving yourself. And it comes from a teacher of mine, Parker Palmer. If you don't know Parker, read his book, Hidden Wholeness. He's a Quaker. I don't think he's a minister. I think he's just a teacher, but he's an amazing man. And in his book, Hidden Wholeness, he writes the following. There was a time when farmers on the Great Plains, at the first sign of a blizzard, would run a rope from the back door out to the barn. They all knew stories of people who had wandered off and been frozen to death, having lost sight of home in a whiteout while still in their own backyards. Today we live in a blizzard of another sort, he writes. It swirls around us as economic injustice, ecological ruin, physical and spiritual violence, and their inevitable outcome, war. It swirls within us as fear, frenzy, greed, deceit, indifference to the suffering of others. We all know stories of people who have wandered off into this madness and been separated from their own souls, losing their moral bearings and even their mortal lives. The consequences of this one are real. I have so many experiences of people who lost themselves. Some of them physically, like my father and my grandmother. As you probably know, my grandmother killed herself when I was 15. My father killed himself 17 years ago, so however old I was. And both of them lost their way. They didn't have this rope, which I'll talk about in a second. And so there are physical consequences, mortal life consequences to not having a rope. However, most of the people that I've known, I guide, when they come to me or when I've met them, they're lost. They're looking for a rope. Now, what is a rope? A rope is a thing, or it's not. It can be a thing. It's a concept. It's an idea. It's a value. It's a connection. It can be mental, emotional, physical, spiritual. We all need a rope. So it is something that connects us when we're feeling lost in our blizzard, in the whiteout of our lives. As an example, when people are going through divorce, I see this a lot, that their whole world is unraveled. It's true with all kinds of loss, death, of course, but something about divorce is so confusing because it's like that example that Parker gives of being lost in your own backyard. You know, when a loved one dies, you're not in your own backyard. You're in completely foreign territory. You never see them again. Your life is entirely different. But with most divorces, not all, but most divorces, you still have contact with that person. You have to go through a process of, divorce doesn't happen right away. It takes time. So you're interfacing with them, or you may be, very likely you have kids or assets with them. And those things make it confusing. It becomes very gray. And I see people really lose themselves in divorce. They get gaslit a lot of times, starting to believe the things that their soon-to-be ex or their ex says about them. And so when they come to me, it's like they're in their own backyard, but they're lost in the whiteout of their life without the connection to their soul. And so we'll look for something to anchor them, their rope, to connect them to their home, so to speak. So for them, their rope might be the love that they have for their kids. And I've counseled many people who don't even have access to their kids, at least for a period of time, that the kids are weaponized and withheld from them. And one of the things we talk about is your spouse can take away your kids for a period of time, but they can't take them away. They can't take away your feelings for them, your love for them. So as an example, one person I worked with, we had writing letters to his kids to mail to them. They wouldn't get through. So he mailed them to himself. And when they came to him, he put them in a drawer so that they could see that he mailed them, that he wrote them, and he would deliver them to them at a later date. Those became his rope, and they sustained him through the whiteout of his life. Eventually, he handed them to his kids, and they truly appreciated it. And that's, to me, frosting on the cake. If he never would have been able to put them into his children's hands, of course, that's a tragedy unto itself, but not as big a tragedy as without the writing of those letters that became his rope, he would have lost himself in the blizzard of his own life. Um, Another example of that is, your ex doesn't get to take away from you your memories or what was true. We're gaslit so many times by our ex into believing that it wasn't real, but that's only for you to decide. And so we talked about him not allowing her to take away his love he had for her. He may not feel it anymore, but it was real, and it will always be real in his memories. And she didn't get to strip that from him. And so we really sifted through that, and that became a rope. For somebody who's lost a loved one in death, there's a saying that I've shared before, I'll share it again, but a person dies two deaths. Once when their body dies, and once when their story dies, or sometimes they say their name dies. And there was nothing we can do about their physical death, but we become a guardian of their stories, of their name. And death doesn't get to take that from us. And so 1,000 different ways where we become a guardian of their story. And that can be by writing it, telling their story, or just by daily thinking about them, living them, committing to living our lives on their behalf. That's a rope. It was for me. After my dad killed himself, that was my rope that got me through my darkness. There's 1,000 ways to find a rope. It can be another person, although that can be complicated or dangerous. If we tie ourselves to somebody who, we can't control, or we aren't certain that they'll be here, doesn't mean you don't make the bonds. It just means the rope needs to be beyond a physical flesh and blood. My best friend, Mark, died years back, as I'm sure you've heard me say. And yet there's not a day that's gone by that I haven't thought of Mark or literally spoken to him every morning. Watch the campfire tool where I speak to him. That's my rope. He's my lifeline in so many ways to my past, to parts of me that only he remembered or had access to, or I only have access to when I'm pulling on that rope. It can be an activity, meditation. My son, Yehuda, who's now 21, went through hell in high school, and he went to a therapeutic boarding school, and he turned to quiet mindfulness practice as a lifeline for him. And I saw firsthand just how powerful of a rope that can be. It can be reading, it can be walking, it can be, again, there's no shortage of ropes in your lives. It can be an idea, it can be core value. For me, I turn to the Enneagram. Each one of these has a core rope, if you will, that connects us to our soul. So for me, for example, Enneagram 8, the Challenger, it's truth or, power. Not power as in we usually think of it, but more like an autonomy, agency. That's the word. And when I get back to that and think of Dr. Viktor Frankl's idea that this is the last of freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. No matter what happens to me, my rope is choose my way, choose my response. Don't be a victim, be a victor, V-I-K-T-O-R. That's a rope for me. So it doesn't matter what your rope is. All that matters is you have one or many ropes, and you tie them onto you at all times, but especially when you're going through the whiteout, your blizzard. And when you are, make sure you have those ropes ready. Make sure they're practiced. That means you strengthen them before the blizzard comes. You use them. Another one for me is my mission statement. I have a 3-paragraph mission statement. I use it daily so that when the day comes, when I have to turn to my version of the Lord's Prayer or the Shema Yisrael, this is mine, my go-to. I composed it, and I try to say it daily. Certainly multiple times a week, so that when the shit hits the fan, I'm not concocting a rope or trying to string together pieces of string to intertwine it. It's already there. It's my anchor. It's my lifeline. And that's what it means to get a rope. So get out there and get your rope. Get lots of rope. Practice it. Use them. Because someday we will all need a rope to tie ourselves off, to tie ourselves up to our home, to our soul, to anchor ourselves, to get through the storm I will see you in the next video. Until then, defy your number, create your rope, and live your spirit.